Welcome to Eric on The Last Taboo. This is the first episode of Season 2. And today we're joined by Eric Smith. And Eric, good to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. And who is Eric Smith?
I like to think that I'm a normal guy with SMI. I'm just working toward being a professional advocate and mental health professional. Currently in graduate school in pursuit of a Master of Social Work to help accomplish those goals. But with the exception of SMI, I just like to think I'm a normal guy.
And what is SMI?
So that's serious mental illness, and I don't want to speak beyond my capabilities of understanding, but it's my understanding that SMI is generally comprised of major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, and bipolar. So when people hear the term serious mental illness, for SMI, and they're saying, well, my anxiety is serious, and that very well may be the case. Or they're like, my OCD is serious. Again, that very well may be the case. But SMI is comprised of just those few diagnoses I mentioned earlier.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born Phoenix, Arizona, 1983. So talking to a 37-year-old Eric Smith right now.
All right. And where did you grow up?
That is a good question. So I've been in San Antonio long enough that I call it home. I've been in San Antonio since the start of my 5th grade year, so a long time. But the majority of my childhood before that, even though I moved around a bit, the majority of my childhood before that was spent in California. San Francisco for a little bit, and then San Diego for longer than that. From kindergarten through 4th grade in San Diego.
All right. And when were you first diagnosed?
First diagnosed in my mid-teenage years. It was, like for a lot of people when they hit their mid-teenage years that have some sort of mental illness, especially SMI, it really it starts to become more noticeable, I guess, by those who a person is around. So friends, family, school, etc. And there were enough, I guess, sort of red flags where, my grades were slipping. Things started to be a little different for me, less interested in some stuff. So went to a professional psychiatrist who said that I am, at the time, he said that, Eric is likely manic bipolar. And I mean, that diagnosis has stuck. Over the years, I've heard various diagnoses, and not necessarily every doctor is in agreement with what the prior doctor has said, but bipolar has stuck. If you talk to any of the doctors that were my doctor while I was hospitalized, any of those few times that I was, they will tell you, without a doubt, schizo-affective disorder in addition to bipolar disorder. But it's tough for doctors who haven't seen an individual in the throes of, schizo-affective episodes or deep psychotic episodes to understand the full context of any individual's given experience on a continuum of mental illness.
Have you ever had a doctor try to switch up your meds? Like he talks to you and is like, oh, you don't have schizoaffective disorder. Let's switch you to, say, anxiety medication.
So I've had, I'll answer that 2 ways. So I've had the same doctor at various times of me being their patient say, things don't look how I like them to right now. You don't appear as healthy as you could be, so I'm going to switch up meds. I'm either going to add 1 milligrams of this or switch you to this, take you off this. And yeah, there was a lot of that. So I haven't necessarily gone from one doctor to the next where the next doctor is like, I'm going to just have to wipe the slate clean and not give you anything you're currently on. Generally, what was more in line with what happened is, let's say when I would change from one doctor to the next, that doctor would keep me on those things for a little while, do some sort of assessment of their own of how I was doing, and then say, through their professional opinion, I'd like to either raise you on this, lower you on this, add this, remove this. And it sounds like kind of a mess and chaos, and that's because it is. Because being moved through lots of different medications, it changes how a person is. It isn't just like taking a Tylenol, right? Where if you take a Tylenol, like you might, be a little calmer, a little tired that day, and then wake up the next day back to norm. No, like these are very powerful medicines that change a person's, chemical balance in their brain. It changes the way their body processes certain things. So, it was years of chaos before I finally arrived at the medication that not only worked, but is working where, for a long time now, since I'd say near the beginning of 2012, where I haven't had to have my psych meds raised or lowered or changed from one thing to another. And that was just such a long journey. And I have,
How long did it take you to get your current medication cocktail right?
The better part of, let's see, if I go back to when I was first prescribed some sort of psych med in my mid-teenage years, and now I'm 37. So we're talking, and let's see, and then right up until the beginning of 2012, so a long time. So if we're going to talk about it like in terms of exact years for a timeline's purpose, so I was 15 when I was prescribed psych meds for the first time, and then the med I'm on now, clozapine, that's the psych med that I'm on now, and that's the only psych med I need. Now, that was first prescribed to me towards the end of my last hospitalization at the end of 2011, and then I've been stabilized on this dose of clozapine since near the beginning of 2012. So, it's been some years now that I've been stable, but on the flip side of that, it was many years of just trial and error with just like handfuls of medicines that either didn't work or worked for a very short period of time, and then I had to go on to something else. Chaos.
Okay. And you say you started taking meds in high school. Were you able to graduate high school?
Technically, yes, but if I'm being 100% honest here in the interest of transparency, I got a GED, which is like a high school equivalency degree. Oh. And so I did not formally graduate high school, but I did receive an equivalency degree.
All right. And when were you first hospitalized?
First hospitalized about 11 years ago, so we're talking around the 2009 timeline. And if I could summarize that, I was hospitalized on the inpatient side of things for 3 months. And I had 2 hospitalizations since that time, the last of which ended towards the beginning of 2012.
Okay. And how, explain what is AOT?
So assisted outpatient treatment is a program and set of laws, depending on the context it's being used, that's in place for individuals with serious mental illness to receive the treatment that is needed, whether it be, a connection through community services, psychiatry, and a judge that oversees things. Because in the absence of those things, we find that a lot of people in the United States with serious mental illness find themselves part of the criminal justice system, because what happens when someone's got serious mental illness? They look suspicious, perhaps, like they're out and about. They may be talking to themselves, or being of concern to other people who are just aware that someone's not appearing normal, right? They're just so the public sees someone's not in their right mind, the police get called, and then many times people with SMI will either be taken to a hospital or jail, and if they think a crime has been committed, if the police think a crime has been committed. But neither sending someone to a hospital for acute care to be released, nor sending people into jail, neither of those things meets the needs of society or individuals that have serious mental illness as part of their diagnoses. So AOT is in place with, again, a judge, and it will vary. It will vary from one area to the next, because it's not implemented in one single uniform manner across the United States. But speaking to the AOT program I was in, it was a judge who oversaw my treatment to make sure that I was being compliant with my medication, to make sure that I was showing up where I needed to be for the hearings, to making sure that I'm well enough to no longer require further hospitalization. And in the absence of something like that, where it's a judge handling things through a civil court, I would just be, cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. So we've got AOT as a necessary measure in place to make sure people with serious mental illness.
Is AOT just in San Antonio, or is that in the whole of Texas?
It's not just in San Antonio, and actually AOT in some form or fashion exists in 48 of the 50 states in the United States right now. There's a couple in the Northeast that don't currently have any form of AOT on the books. But in mentioning that, it's important to also note that what AOT looks like here in San Antonio, where I live, is vastly different from what AOT looks like, let's say, in some areas of California, where the burden or the standard, rather, for someone to enter into AOT is perhaps in some jurisdictions out there much, much higher, where an individual must definitely be like a danger to themselves or others as defined by a much more narrow, higher set of criteria than it would be here in Texas, where I more loosely fit a definition of being a danger to myself or others.
Okay, and what happened at the FBI building?
So at the FBI building, I was convinced that I had information about an assassination plot on then President Obama. So I tried, this was very early in the morning. It was, I don't know at the time. It was, I would guess, because I'd been driving around for a while and it was recent sunup. It was probably between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 or 8 a.m. my time. And I tried to gain access to San Antonio's FBI headquarters. And I was convinced that since I had information, that they were just going to let me in, which, of course, looking back on it, is quite insane. There's no way that someone just driving randomly up to an FBI building is going to get let in, right? We know that because we're two currently seeing people talking to each other about this. But me at the time, I was convinced that I could just, drive up through their guarded entrance. You've seen guarded entrances before, right? Like there's a guardhouse, then there's like a secure entrance.
Yeah.
And you have to be, so you get the feel of what it looked like. So I just figured, this guy's just going to let me ride in. So like I drove my car and I didn't really want to stop there. I was just going to just drive right in. And my car was stopped by either an automatic or triggered barrier of some kind that like came down on my car. It didn't destroy my car, but it did prevent me from coming in. And boy, I am lucky that I wasn't shot dead right there because, a person who looked like the state that I was in, I had been awake for a very long time. I was not a part of reality. It was very apparent by looking at me, I'm guessing, that I drove my car into that secured area and, no one opened fire on me, which I'm very grateful for. And it didn't end as badly as it definitely could have. And in looking at news, the current events over the past however long you want to look back, I can't help but think that me being a Caucasian individual had something to do with the fact that the situation was resolved without me being harmed.
Okay, and that's interesting. Is this what triggered AOT?
This is partially what triggered AOT. So to be clear about AOT, for an individual like myself, I got to AOT after being an inpatient. So I was stabilized as an inpatient, which required me to be hospitalized for, 3 different 3-month stays. And it's after those inpatient stays that I'm then put into the outpatient program, which is assisted outpatient treatment. And so if we're to say, is that something that triggered it? Yes, it played a role in leading up to my hospitalization that then turned into an outpatient order as part of AOT.
Okay, and are you forcibly medicated when you're in the AOT program?
This is a question that I get from a lot of people, even medical experts that don't necessarily operate in the realm of SMI, and the actual answer to that question is no, to which when I'm speaking with people in person, like I get a shocked face, like, oh, I hear about forced medicine all the time. And that's true. A person can be forcibly medicated, but that's when a person's on an inpatient. So if a person is under the care as an inpatient in a hospital, whatever doctors are in there at that time, whoever are in charge of things, they get to, assess things and say, okay, we need to raise this individual's meds off this, we need to, inject them with this. Like, all of that is something that can be enforced while the person is an inpatient. On the outpatient side of things, nowhere in the United States can anyone be forced medication as an outpatient. But as an asterisk to that, when a person's on an AOT order, they have to continue seeing, like, the doctor who prescribes the meds and the judge who oversees the order in some form or fashion. Now, the individual, if the individual appears to start being, either a danger to themselves or others, or it's clear that they're decompensating, a doctor and a judge can get together on an order and, send that person on an inpatient side of things into a hospital to force them to take meds if they're unwilling to take medicine. So it isn't as if a person on the outpatient side of things has no consequences to not take their meds, because they could quickly find themselves back in a hospital on a judge's and doctor's order if they're decompensating or not taking their meds.
Okay, and how much say do you have in your treatment when you're in an AOT program?
What do I have in my treatment?
How much say, like how much decision making do you?
Okay. So, yeah, this is also a great question, and it will vary depending on the individuals running the AOT program. My ideal for an AOT program is entirely in line with how Judge Kazin here in San Antonio ran it, and the doctors that were also a part of that program. One of the first questions I was always asked as part of AOT, when I would go in to see either the judge as part of an informal hearing or my doctor, was, how are you doing? Are any side effects you're experiencing, would you like to discuss them? Is it something you can't deal with? And in some instances, the side effects, were so bad that it was just absolutely intolerable just to be awake and conscious. So in those instances, the fact that the judge and the doctor were asking me, are these meds something that you can deal with? Yeah, they were allowing me to have a say. And even though sometimes, like, I don't want to pick on Geodon as a medication because it's out there and it's working for a lot of people who take it. But for me, I was put on it, and I was getting horrible side effects that were attributable to this medicine. And even though I was sane, according to the judge, and sane according to the doctor, they knew they couldn't keep me on this med because, A, the likelihood of me wanting to continue a medicine that was giving me horrible side effects for my whole life is limited. And the likelihood of me remaining compliant with any medication regimen in the future, if I was losing trust in it because of Geodon, was also a factor. So they responsibly and wisely took into account the fact that I was on a medicine that I couldn't bear the side effects of, and that had them agree to change things up. Now, if you compare that against some other areas, there aren't necessarily people in every single area where there's an AOT program that are getting that much say in their treatment. But I would encourage any doctor, any judge, any medical professional that's if their only goal is to get a person sane and not take into account a person's ability to deal with horrible side effects, that's short-sighted, and any successes from something like that will be short-lived. You have to take into account a person's own feedback based on the care they're getting.
Okay. And how have you advocated for AOT?
A few different ways. There was the first of which was a documentary. I was in the Highlights AOT. I went to the Texas State Capitol building to testify before some elected.
What is the name of the documentary?
It's a long one. I believe it's Stopping the Revolving Door: A Civil Approach to Treating Serious Mental Illness.
Okay.
Yeah, that one was actually produced by Treatment Advocacy Center out of the Washington, D.C. area.
All right.
And in addition to that documentary, other ways that I've advocated testifying before elected representatives, I've written testimonials that were intended for use in California. I was on Washington, D.C.'s National Public Radio to do an interview about AOT. Dr. Ken Rosenberg, wonderful, brilliant man. His book, Bedlam, I was discussed in that in part. And there are other conferences around the country, Las Vegas, Ohio, Texas, and a few others currently in the works. But I'll be able to say more about that once those are more finalized. And my bout with actual, firsthand, I'm in the trenches advocacy with elected representatives on my own. I went to Washington, D.C. last year to meet with a member of the Congressional Mental Health Caucus to discuss AOT. And ever since then, I've fallen in love with the idea of speaking with elected representatives because they're the ones that are, writing and voting on the passage of legislation. So I want to be a part of that conversation because not being a part of it means, I have no part in any of the discussions for legislation related to serious mental illness or AOT. And I'm grateful that some elected representatives have been incredibly receptive to conversation about this. There are some that aren't, but the majority of them are, and I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, Kamala Harris, the senator from California, is no longer running. Of course, both parties have their nominees, but her health care plan was more in line with what people like you and I advocate. And but basically, what did you think of her? What did you think of her health care plan, and why was there so much pushback?
I think any plan that seeks to remove barriers to treatment and improve the quality of care is worth supporting, and Senator Harris's plan, as you mentioned, did that. She got pushback against her plan in part because things like AOT are sometimes perceived to be a violation of an individual's rights. And from where I stand, fighting for a person's right to remain insane is immoral and unethical. But the people who stand against AOT don't seem to understand that people in the depths of SMI are not able to sanely make a decision about their health care. And that's why it's so important that AOT is so important to be recognized as such, to be used as a tool to help people move toward reality instead of being left to wallow in the despair of some form of psychosis. And when people fight for my right, and I've said this before, and when people fight for my right as an individual diagnosed with serious mental illness to remain basically to choose to not be treated, what they're actually doing is fighting for my right as an individual diagnosed with SMI to be completely owned by all of the demons that I used to be before AOT and a psych bed saved my life. So when people are saying, we need to stop allowing people to be put in psych beds, and we need to stop people from being allowed to be in programs that, get them the treatment that they need, people that are fighting for something like that, what's their end game? To let people choose to be insane? If people could choose to be insane, what they're not taking into account is someone who's like in the depths of SMI. They're not in a place where they can make a risk-benefit analysis of, if I take this med, this might happen, or if I don't take this med, I'll remain insane. They're quite insane. That's literally the whole point of a program like AOT and the whole point of psych beds. I'm yet to hear a great solution from people who push back against AOT or push back against like the plan that Senator Harris had with their solution as to how to help people become healthy. What's their end game? To let people just, roll the dice and hope they don't end up in jail or dead? If that's their end game, that doesn't sound very humane to me at all.
Okay. And I agree with you. Have you ever heard anyone say nothing about us without us, but you don't really feel that they've ever been where you've been with like psychosis?
Yeah, when I hear things like that, where it's groups of people that they want something specific done, nothing about us without us. I think people are entitled to say whatever they want to, but I do understand where they're coming from. So if laws or programs are being created to help a specific population, like those with SMI, it makes sense to involve the perspectives of those with SMI. And so I get where they're coming from, and we should be involved in the conversation. And I encourage anybody, whether they actually have a diagnosis of SMI or they've got a friend or a family member, or they literally don't know anyone with it, but they want to advocate for justice and fair treatment and quality health care, I would encourage everyone to be part of the conversation that is dialogue about moving towards a more desirable goal of better quality of care, better community services, better response overall to SMI. And the more people that are involved in that conversation, the more progress we can make. And it's not just about involving people that are directly a part of the conversation. I think the value of someone having a dissenting opinion or disagreement or complete objection to something, that's also an important part of dialogue, because as soon as things like that can be addressed and met with logic and reason and good conversation, we can move forward. Progress can be made. But as long as people remain polarized in the sense that we've got one group on one side who are pro something and another group on the other side who are anti something, in this case, as an example, AOT, where let's use Senator Harris's health plan, where we've got on one side people saying, hey, this is going to be excellent for people with SMI, and people on the other side saying, hey, this is a violation of rights. Instead of people just yelling back and forth at each other or arguing or bickering or being petty and politicizing everything, let's have a dialogue. Let's have some disagreement, address the disagreement, and move forward. That's how humans move forward. That's how we make progress.
All right. And Eric, what are your plans after graduation, and what is your major?
My major undergrad was psychology, and thereafter I started Master's of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, but decided to go the route of social work because as a licensed clinical social worker, I will still be able to counsel, but I'll be better prepared for advocacy efforts. And I am keeping my options open about the exact route of employment I'll take. But whatever path I go on, it is likely that advocacy at the macro level will be a major part of it if I'm not operating strictly at the micro level doing counseling type services.
All right, Eric. Well, thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Diaz. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for your patience throughout this very, very hectic past few months.
All right, and thank you for listening to the first episode of Season 2 of Eric on the Last Taboo. And I say thank you for joining us.